So, hello and good evening, Newcastle Noir. I'm Frances Walker and I'm joining you from not too far away. I'm just a couple of doors away from the library of which you find yourselves in this evening. I'm joined tonight and a huge welcome to David Baldacci. Now, David, I don't know if you've ever come across the television programme, the Eurovision. It's a song contest which happens all over Europe and everybody comes on to mark the scores and they tell them where they're calling from. So I'm in a library office in Newcastle. David Baldacci, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Fairfax, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C.
And you win the prize for the author who's dining in from the furthest away this evening. So thank you ever so much.
Okay, thank you.
So David Baldacci is one of the world's best-selling thriller writers. He's a former trial lawyer and a keen interest in world politics. He has special knowledge in the US political system and intelligence services. He has written close to 50 international bestsellers, and he's here this evening to talk to us about his latest Amos Decker book, Long Shadows. So I suppose without further ado, this is the latest in the Amos Decker series, and it's the 7th book that you've written in this series. So what drew you back to want to tell more about Amos Decker?
So he's probably my most original, unique protagonist. He's just a different kind of hero. Big, bluff guy who can be very annoying. People who have to work with him, very frustrating. And I'd been away from him for about a year writing other books, and I was thinking about him. So I thought, I've given this guy challenges in every single book, so I decided to give him a new set of challenges. So in Long Shadows, in the very opening chapters of the book, he loses someone very close to him from his past. And then he finds out that he's got a brand new partner that he has to work with the FBI. And Decker hates change, so this is a lot of change in a very short period of time. And for the very first time in his career in this novel, he questions whether he even wants to do this anymore, whether he wants to be a detective, whether he wants to find bad guys. And that's a big deal for him because this is really all he's ever been good at, all he's ever wanted to do with his life ever since he had his traumatic brain injury when he was playing American football. So I wanted this to be a book of challenges and a book of sort of soul searching for him. And at the end of the day, I wanted him to decide, hey, are you still in the game or not? And that's the journey he takes in Long Shadows.
And so with it being the 7th book, how difficult was it to go back to where he left off in the 6th book? If you've written books about different characters, how tricky was it to remember some of the finer details?
Yeah, with him, I don't know, for whatever reason, he's really imprinted indelibly on my mind. So it's really easy to get back into his character. He's just sort of irascible and curmudgeon, and I don't know if that speaks to me. Maybe I share those characteristics, but it was easy to get back to his character and back into his mind. Because really his point of view, what the readers want to know about. They want to get inside the guy's head. What is he thinking about? And I try to give them a huge dose of that because really you're following him throughout the entire book. I break away from him a few times when we meet his new partner, Freddie White, and you get into her head sometimes when she's dealing with family issues and her children and her job and all that. But really, it's his drive, it's his game. And so it was easy for me to get back into his mind and then set him on these whole new series of challenges. I think it's sort of a universal theme. Human beings have to change all the time. You're married to someone and then it breaks up and you try to meet somebody else. Jobs change, careers change, kids grow up. We have challenges thrown at us every day, and sometimes we fall down and then we have to get back up. And this is a tale of him getting knocked down and he's got to get back up.
So with him having so many challenges along the way, with the 7th book, had you foreseen that you had so much of a story to tell about him? Or every time you write a book, do you think, actually, I still got more to say and I'll come back to him?
It is, those are great questions. It's a little bit of both, I think. When I first developed him, I wanted him to have a lot of personal baggage because I felt like intuitively, if he has a lot of personal problems he has to work through, that's a lot of material for future books that I can work through. He has his traumatic brain injury. He has these special skills, perfect recall and synesthesia. So, he sees death as electric blue. He lost his family and he's got, this memory that he remembers their deaths crystal clear, which is a horrible thing. Time does not heal his wounds. So I thought with all that, this guy is good for a lot of books. But then as you write the novels, it's almost like you're sitting down and talking with an old friend and you learn new things. So each novel, I picked up the different things in his personality, in his character arc, and his journey through life that I hadn't thought of from the very beginning. That I thought, okay, now I have additional stuff that I can write about him that I've learned about him. It's almost like having this lifelong friendship, where really good friends, to the day you die, you learn new things about them. Why? Because people change. We don't remain static. At least most people don't. So the more you learn about somebody, the more knowledge and the more information. There's more material to write new things about them, and that has certainly been the case with all my characters, and certainly with Amos Decker.
Brilliant, thank you. I think there's been a couple of technical problems, and I'm ever so sorry because this is the 21st century that we live in, and I think there's been a little bit of a blip in the library. So sorry if you've joined us a little bit late, but David's given some brilliant answers, and I'm sorry if you've missed them. But David, I suppose let me just in case anybody missed that, we're talking this evening to David, who's in Fairfax. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Fairfax,
Yes.
Virginia. Just 1 second, let me just check something. All right, no, we're all okay. We've got all the answers, it's fine.
Good.
So we've talked a little bit about Amos, we talked about the fact that he's got so much more to tell. The story so you've just highlighted that he's got quite a range of medical challenges and benefits, because both bring him I think, don't they? And I think we joked when I spoke to you the other day, you've definitely given me some conditions that I need to read twice to be able to make sure I can say these right. So synesthesia and hypothymesia, have I said that right?
Yes, that's
so
right.
You touched on that a little bit. Would you mind just explaining a little bit more about why you chose to give him those conditions?
Yes, so hyperthymesia is perfect recall. And you can get this condition, it's a real condition, one of two ways. You can either be born with it. There's an American actress named Mary Lou Henner. She starred in a TV series called Taxi and some other things in the United States. She was born with hyperthymesia, so she has perfect recall. And that's great, for an actress. You can read your lines, script once, and you know your lines. Most people who are born with hyperthymesia have what's called perfect autobiographical recall. So that means they remember everything about every minute of their lives from infancy, which pretty amazing if you think about it. Amos Decker didn't get his hyperthymesia that way. The second way to get it is through a traumatic brain injury. Your brain is a really amazing organ. So if he played American football, he got tackled really badly on a play. He was knocked out, severe concussion, traumatic brain injury. He almost died on the field. And when he came out of it, his brain, to work itself way around the damaged area from his injury, had interceded into different areas of his brain, including memory, that most of us never get to. This brain, we use like 10% of our brain, if that. So he all of a sudden accessed the full power of his brain's memory, and that's where the hyperthymesia comes in. The synesthesia is a commingling of sensory pathways, smell, taste, touch, and all that. They're in different areas of your brain. So if you have a traumatic brain injury and your brain is rewiring itself around those damaged areas, what happens is sometimes two sensory pathways cross over and they become commingled. I read a book years ago called Born on a Blue Tuesday about a guy who had synesthesia. So he sees the days of the week in vivid color. So if it's Tuesday, he wakes up and he sees bright blue. If it's Wednesday, it's like this incredible orange. And it's because the sensory pathways have become commingled. And Amos Decker's example of that, his manifestation of that, is when he sees a dead body, electric blue blows up in his mind. And they've hypothesized that people who are really creative and artistic have synesthesia. Mozart, Beethoven, people in other fields, artists, because the vividness of the colors that they see are far beyond the normal person's ability. And that may be why they're so creative in their fields.
Wow. And there's a couple of medical conditions that you highlight in the book. So those ones that I find difficult to say have been two of them. But also the book starts really tragically, actually, with a former partner of his who is suffering quite significantly, and I won't give it away, with early onset dementia. So why do you believe it's important to put a focus on some of the medical conditions that are affecting people in the book?
I think that it's a way for readers to relate to issues that they probably have experienced in their home. Alzheimer's and dementia are so pervasive now that I would be hard put to mention someone I know that has not been affected in some way by that, either through a parent or a grandparent or a family member that has had that happen to them. Unfortunately, it's just the way it works. And so one way to, by writing about it, you sort of demystify it, and you allow people to read about it and maybe have discussions about it. And maybe it might help them in relationships with people they have, where, they become more understanding, because they understand how, frustrating it is for people. Amos Decker is very frustrated too, because he realized before he had his brain injury that he was a very gregarious, outgoing, prankish kind of a guy, loved life. He could pick up on all the social cues, he could kid and all that. And he can't do any of that anymore because his brain changed. He's in the same body. He understands who he used to be, but he can't be that person anymore. And I think people can innately realize how frustrating that is. I know who I used to be and I can't be that person anymore. Why not? It can't work. My brain won't let it happen anymore. So it's like you're trapped by your brain in your own body. So I like talking about real conditions in life, to take away the mystique from them, to allow people to read and learn more about them, to have discussions and allow them to be more understanding. I know people who have had relatives, my own family as well, who have had these issues. And for the caregivers and the people who aren't afflicted with it directly, it can be very frustrating. Mom, dad, uncle, whatever, they can't do what they used to do, or they drove somewhere and they can't get back. And, it's very upsetting. And yeah, it is. But as upsetting as it is for you, can you imagine how upsetting it is for them to lose that level of independence? So, books are for entertainment, but I write books too that try to inform people and maybe make people more understanding about things that happen in life to us all.
Sure, yeah. And you mentioned that, he's not who he was when he was first growing up. He's experienced some real trauma in his life. And the gift that I think that you give him is grounding with his partners. And, we meet Mary Decker at the beginning of the story, who's experiencing early onset dementia. But we also are introducing this book to Freddie White, who again gives him some huge perspective on some things that he possibly hasn't been encountering before. Is that the reason why you introduce partners who probably just give him a different perspective every time?
It's absolutely important to do that. I mean, particularly, I can't speak for your country, but I can speak for my country, and that we all live in bubbles over here. You hear about bubbles, bubbles, bubbles all the time. X doesn't understand Y because Y doesn't understand X, and we live in different parts of the country, and rural versus urban, and blah, blah, blah. So it's always good to be around people who might make you uncomfortable, to be around people who have a different set of perspectives and values and experiences and backgrounds. So I hooked him up with a woman who is Black. And because of that, her history, her experiences, her perspective on life are totally different. She hasn't experienced things that he has experienced, but he hasn't experienced any of the things that she's had to go through in her life. That's just the way the world works, unfortunately, particularly in the United States. And I thought that as bad as it would get for Decker in this novel, when he was he'd lost someone he really cared about, he didn't know if he wanted to be a detective anymore. If I could pair him with someone who had a lot of crap going on in her life too. And what does she do? She gets up every day, puts on her badge and does her job, takes care of her kids, takes care of her life, and keeps going. And in some ways, in this novel, Freddie White was probably the most important lesson that Amos Decker could have learned about. That I won't say it, I'll spell it out. SHIT happens everywhere. And it's all about how you deal with it. And if you crawl into a fetal position and just assume you're doomed, okay, that's one response, probably not a good one. But if you just get up out of bed every day and keep moving forward with a positive attitude and not let the negatives drag you into a pit, which too many people do, then you're going to be okay.
And it's they're a real support network for him, aren't they? So throughout the course of this book, 3 of his former partners are actually in touch. He definitely starts as hard to like and hard to love, in my perspective. But so what keeps drawing them back? What do they learn to love about him?
And yeah, so they understand that he is very frustrating to be around. He can be annoying at times. He can abrasive, cut people off. I think that for the partners in the novel, his current ones and his past ones, the one thing they understand about Amos Decker is that he is this big wounded bear who would like to be a different person, didn't ask for what happened to him to happen to him. He's trying to deal with it. But beyond all of that, up to this point, he's gotten out of bed every day and he's had one mantra in his entire life. And that is, if you do something bad, I'm going to hold you accountable for it. And I won't stop until I do. And no matter how many walls you put up in front of me, I'm going to run right through them all and I'm going to find the truth. And there's something intrinsically valuable about that, because if you look at the world today, social media and all that, it is designed to never reveal the truth about anything. You know, it's just designed to put up fabrication after lie after fabrication. You know, the sky is blue. Nope. We have 11,614, tweets that said the sky is actually purple today. And you're not going to get any of them to believe it's actually blue. But so if anything that's rare becomes really valuable, and I find that in life, truth has become really, really rare. And that's one thing that Amos Decker delivers every time is truth. And I think people who have worked with him respect the hell out of him for that, because he's still willing to take what it takes to do what it takes to find that truth. And those people are special. And when you find them, you got to hold on to them.
And let's talk about the truth of this particular story then. So what I was struck with was the almost prophetic nature of the book, because it starts with the home invasion and the unfortunate killing of a US judge. And it had been recently on the news about Nancy Pelosi, I think that's how you pronounce her name,
Yes.
where there'd been a home invasion and her husband had been really quite severely injured. So I was curious to know whether you could predict the future, or whether this is something that there's a real unfortunate likelihood of working in public office in the US these days.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, certainly people in public office have been attacked all the time. You know, the US is a lot more violent than it needs to be. I think we're 5% of the world's population, and we probably own 90% of the guns and weapons, unfortunate. I wish it weren't that way, but that's just the way it is. So when I write, I have to deal in plausibility. So home invasion where, a bodyguard is killed and the judge is killed. Is that plausible? Well, yeah, a federal judge is always a target because of the cases that he or she tries. Is it plausible that someone like that might have a bodyguard? Absolutely. Happens all the time. U.S. Marshals usually guard federal judges, but in this case, she had her own bodyguard, which she certainly do. She had the money to do it. So those two plausibility boxes are checked. And so with that in mind, I can move forward with the story because I know that these things tend to happen. People get attacked all the time, unfortunately. People get killed all the time, unfortunately, for things they believe in, things they've said, or just because the people who attack them are crazy. They've gone down the QAnon conspiracy rabbit hole and thinks that everybody, is a terrible person because they belong to a certain political party. So those things were all plausible. I did a book I wrote over the summer called The 620 Man. It hypothesized that, certain foreign countries like Russia and others had bought up a bunch of businesses and properties in the United States through these secret companies. And that book came out in July. So I just saw a couple of weeks ago, the Department of Justice here has started a task force where they're going after all these secret companies they think that Putin and Russia have set up to own businesses and property in the United States. So I was like, guys, if you just come to me over the summer, I could have saved you a lot of trouble.
But it's been, how much is that? I started the conversation with a bit of a bio with you saying that you had specialist knowledge in the US political system and intelligence services. So how much is your insider knowledge, or how much is just what's going on in the world at the moment?
Yeah, it's really about applying common sense, I think, for me. And I was a political science major in college, and I love politics, and I'm deeply involved in the political system and structure in this country, campaigns that I work on and candidates that I, help. So like for the 620 Man, I read the Panama Papers, and the Pandora Papers talking about $40 trillion worth of dark money floating around the world. These different secret tax havens, bank accounts, trust funds all over the world, including in the United States, including in England and everywhere. And they were really good about meticulously documenting. And to give you perspective, $40 trillion is about twice the gross domestic product of the United States of America, which is the largest economy in the world. That is a lot of money. And so those papers really documented meticulously, the money and the places where it's held, and some of the people, there were whose money it belonged to. But the question it didn't answer was, what are they doing with the money? Who's going to? I'm not going to go out and just buy a private jet with that, or another house. They're going to try to make the playing field even more uneven, even more unfair to other people. So they want to manipulate the world, basically. And how do you do that? Well, one of the ways you do that is you go to, the United States of America, which is arguably the biggest political prize in the world, and you buy up as much as you can, not just property, but people, and not just people, but people in power. So for me, I'm looking at it, if I had $40 trillion and I wanted to manipulate the world, what would I do? I'd go after the number one superpower in the world and see if I could end up owning it. And that's how I wrote that book. And the fact that it's turned out to be true, is it surprising to me? No, because that's what I would have done. And that's what other people have done.
Well, okay, well, we'll move on quickly about putting yourself in any sort of dangerous position of committing crimes and putting it onto YouTube. So we'll move on quick. But you've given us a bit of an insight into the fact that the research that you do. So I'm going to guess that the Panama Papers are no easy read. I've not read them myself. So yeah. How much dedication do you put into making yourself feel prepared for a story?
A lot. I mean, I did the same thing when I was a lawyer. So I would prepare for cases just meticulously. I would, research everything I needed to research. I talked to everybody. I depose witnesses. I take witness statements. I would read the law, make sure I'd done all the research, anticipated every question that could be thrown at me, everything that might come up at trial, everything a jury might ask, everything a judge might ask. So immerse yourself in that world. And writing a novel was the very same thing for me. I never wanted to write a sentence where I didn't know the answer to the question. As a lawyer, you never want to ask a question of a witness if you don't know the answer, because you never want to be surprised. If you don't know the answer, guess what? You're going to be surprised. So that's how I approach writing my novel, is sort of scorched earth. And the cool thing about it is, the more research you do, the more plot lines and devices you can come up with. I mean, I've done research where I've learned about certain technologies or certain things that happen in the world, that I then have prompted new ideas for plots in my mind. So it's almost like it's a win-win. Not only do you learn something new, you actually learn something you can add to make an addition to the novel. That's happened to me many, many, many times. So plus I love to research. I love learning things. I love knowledge and facts and information. Every day I wake up and I read and I read and I read and I read. When the FTX cryptocurrency guy that just went bankrupt and took a bunch of people down with him, I'd seen an interview. I predicted that a long time ago. Why? Because I read an interview with the guy where he was on with somebody who was talking about, all the books that he had read. And they asked this guy, so, what do you read? And the guy said, I've never read a book in my life. I don't understand why anybody would. And I thought to myself, you're going down.
But tell me more about that, because when we've spoken before, reading's so important to you, and it started from a really early age, didn't it? So tell us a little bit about what drew you to it in the first place.
I had a very strong imagination as a kid. I loved to daydream. I loved to come up with fantasies and, just create my own little worlds. And so when I opened a book, I saw on paper exactly what I wanted to do, in my own head. And I saw other people have done it. That is so cool. And I can read about it. So they can put me in their own little worlds. And I became a writer because I wanted to put other people in my worlds. And that's what I've done for many, many years now. And plus, if you look at it this way, your brain, think of it as a gas tank. And it has to have gas to make it work, right? Otherwise, it's useless. It's just an empty void. Reading is how you put fuel up here, And the more you know about different things, people say, how do you come up with your plots? I said, well, one, I go out and just watch the world and see what goes on out there. And two, I read a whole lot about a lot of different things. So they said, you've covered like 8 or 9 different subjects in this book. How did you do that? Well, I read about 8 or 9 different subjects. And so I figured I could pluck a little bit here, there, and put it all together into a really cool plot. And if I hadn't done any of that reading, guess what? I wouldn't have come up with that plot. So reading, if you don't read, you're missing out on like 3/4 of what life has to offer, because reading allows you to enjoy the wisdom, information, knowledge of the rest of the world. And if you don't care to have that, I'm not sure what you're doing being a human being, because, why else are you going to be here? That experience for me has been one of the greatest joys of my life and has changed me in many ways. I think you and I talked about this before. I grew up in the American South in the 1960s and 70s in a very racist environment. And I grew up with people who to this day believe that, blacks are inferior to whites and that the old ways should have been the way we live today. I might have grown up that way too. And what saved me was the library and books. And through books, I saw the rest of the world. And I saw all the things that we shared, not what made us different, what made us similar. And that changed who I was. And that changed who I am today. So for me, books are like the Holy Grail right up here.
And your passion for it is palpable, and you've executed passion into creating a foundation as well, the Wish You Well Foundation. So not only do you find it really important for yourself, but you really wanted to make sure that, you're talking to Newcastle Library, and you're probably preaching to the converted of the audience that really enjoy every single book that they can devour. But actually, you wanted to make sure that more people have got the opportunity to do so, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly in an age, we live in an age of disinformation. Where every day it's like somebody shows, like the guy that, attacked Paul Pelosi, he had gone on the internet and was convinced that Nancy Pelosi, eats little children. So he was going to go and stop that, right? So for me, being able to read real books with real information, with truth, is a way for people to become fair-minded, tolerant, embracing, inclusive, knowledgeable. And do I want somebody who's read a lot of books, and has a lot of information, valid information, going to the voting booth and making decisions on who's going to lead my country? Absolutely. Do I want someone who only gets their information from, one of the social media platforms that are just full of disinformation and lies, for them to go and then pick who's going to lead our country? No. You're going to get two very dissimilar outcomes because of that. I really think that we should be led by people who actually believe in reality. Call me crazy, but I think reality is sort of important, because if you're not in reality, you're in another place that I don't want to be. And the only way you acquire all of those things is reading. To read and to think are the same verb for me. I don't know how you do one or the other. Sometimes I ask people, and when I go out in the audience, imagine having to do all the stuff you do in your daily life, from getting up in the morning throughout your day and going to bed at night. And imagine trying to do all those things if you can't read. And everybody's like, oh my God, I'd be totally lost. Mm-hmm. Yes, you would be, but a lot of people are in that situation, and those people still get to go to the voting booths. They still get to deal with life. They still get to make decisions that will impact all of us. So the Wish You Well Foundations, we have a simple task: eradicate illiteracy, to make people read at the highest possible level they can. Everybody, if that happens, we're going to have a great world.
He's hoping, absolutely. And that your passion for reading is clearly then spilled into writing. You've written close to 50 international bestsellers. And we were just talking earlier that ranges between 2 or 3 books a year. How on earth do you find the motivation to pick up the pen or to type the words to be producing that amount of work per year?
Yeah, there's a fire in the belly that comes with being incredibly passionate about something that is you're so passionate about it. It's how you identify yourself. When people ask me, what do you do for a living? I said, I don't do anything for a living. I said, I'm a writer. So I spent many years writing and not making a dime from it, because for the sheer love of sitting down and telling stories, just making stuff up and putting down on pieces of paper. And I did that for years and years and years and never made any money doing it. It's hard for non-writers to understand this, but the creative process of, my job is not to do the same thing over and over again until I get all the arrows out of it, and If I'm a pilot flying a plane, I fly it the same way I've always flown it, the way I was trained, never deviate from that. And the same with a lot of occupations. Surgeons, you do it the exact same way, that way you don't make any mistakes. I get up every day and my job is to create something that doesn't exist yet, until I think of it. And for me, that is like the coolest thing I could possibly be spending my time doing. And because I think it's so cool, because I don't think it's a job, I do it all the time. And that makes me a lot more prolific. So yeah, 2 books a year, 3 books a year, sometimes it sounds like a lot. For me, it's all fun. I'm not saying it's not hard work. Sure, it's hard work. Writing stuff is hard and editing, and some days are good and some days are not so good. But at the end of the day, I sit back and go, my job is just to make stuff up. And how amazingly cool is that? So I get to be like 7 years old for the rest of my life. And I never lose sight of that. So people say, oh, you finished that book, so you're probably going to take a vacation for a month. I'm like, what I do is a vacation. Everybody else has really hard jobs. They got to go and do the stuff maybe they don't want to be doing. Me, I get up every day and I just become a 7-year-old again. And how lucky am I?
Yeah, very lucky indeed. And at this point, I'm just going to say that I've got about 2 or 3 more questions to ask David, but the audience members are going to be very, very welcome to ask any questions of him if you like. We are currently streaming on YouTube on Toon Libraries. So if you would like to put any questions onto that and you have an account to do so, you're very welcome to, and I'll pick them up. Otherwise, if I can ask you to just wave your hand, one of the volunteers is going to come and find you and they will get your question to me, I promise. So you've just mentioned as well, David, about your vacation. So we've just been talking earlier on about Christmas coming, and you said, well, you will enjoy Christmas, but a lot of it will be working as well. So how does your family react to that? Is that just the part and parcel of being in the family with David Baldacci?
It is. Everybody has sort of accepted that at certain times Dad will disappear. And I've started writing books, on Christmas Day, for a couple of books that I've written actually over different years. My wife, I've opened a present for my wife, and it's one of those really cool journals. And I've disappeared and started to handwrite, books on Christmas Day. Just idea hit me, and I go away and I write it. And it's funny too, we'll be at parties sometimes, and I'll be sitting in the corner, kind of like looking like this. And somebody will come over to my wife and say, Michelle, David looks odd. Has he had a stroke or something? Is he okay? And my wife will look over and she goes, no, he's just finishing a chapter. Give him 10 minutes. He'll be back. Can I have another drink, please? Thank you. And that's just, we've worked it out. And it's not a 9-to-5 job. There's no way really to turn it off, because you can't turn this thing off. I've been at events totally unrelated to anything, and I've seen someone that sparked an idea, or I've seen 2 people talking, or I've seen a building, or I've seen a car go into an underground garage, or I've seen somebody walk out with a package and hand it to somebody through the car window. And all of a sudden I was like, what if? And then I'm off and running, so that's why I say it's more of a lifestyle. It's not a hobby, it's not a passion, it's not a job. It's like I go out the door and the world is, my oyster. Anything I see out there could possibly trigger the next novel.
And you've mentioned packages, and it's a certain time of year. So if a certain somebody was going to leave a lovely present for you under the tree, which were a book, is there anything in particular that you're asking for Christmas that'd be a lovely surprise? Is there a book that you would really hope to see under the tree? Yes,
there are actually 2 books. One is a biography by John Meacham about Abraham Lincoln. I've known John. I met him many years ago. He's a wonderful Pulitzer Prize winner, terrific historian. He's a professor at Vanderbilt University. And I've always been fascinated by Abraham Lincoln. Talk about contradictions and conflicts and being a president who you're elected and, oh, guess what? You're about to enter a civil war, which is going to tear the country apart, and there might not be another United States of America. Go for it. And the second one actually it just came out, I believe. It's a new biography on Agatha Christie, and how she grew up, her marriages, her children, her parents, and her career. And I've always been fascinated by Christie because obviously she's the world's best-selling writer. No one's going to approach those numbers. and just a fascinating woman who, you know, according to her own word, had no grand ambition to be like this best-selling writer, and had a very circuitous path to becoming a writer. And I just find that fascinating. I love reading about sort of the lives of other writers to see, you know, how they ended up where they did. So hopefully those two books will be under the tree.
But they're both biographies, so no winter romance for you.
I do a lot of, you know, people send me a lot of books for blurbs to, you know, to give them quotes and stuff like that. So I read a lot of stuff that way. I certainly do read fiction, and I love fiction. But sometimes, you know, biographies are kind of cool. When I was a kid, there was a collection of biographies in the library in the United States where it chronicled the lives of famous people, but only their childhood. So the book started when they were born and the book ended when they turned 18. And that was fascinating for me because I thought, you know, they're my age and they accomplished great things. And, you know, maybe I could too, who knows? So I've always liked biographies. It's almost like you're getting a peek into somebody else's life. And that's always a very cool thing.
So I can't help but ask then, just because you quite enjoy biographies. If anybody were going to write a biography about you, who would you hope that could be?
God, a very, very dear friend who would let me read it first.
Well, I mean, speaking about that, we mentioned earlier that I'm always really intrigued to see who's in the acknowledgements of a book, because they're there because it matters, right? You don't put them in the front of your book unless you really want to shout out about them. So at the beginning of this book, you are thanking Ginny and Bill Colwell. So if we're not intruding too much, would you mind sharing who they are?
Yes, Jenny Colwell was the principal of my kids' high school, and a wonderful person who helped shape a lot of young lives in a very positive way. She's just a very good person. She's has retired now, and that's what prompted me to include her in the dedication. Her husband, Bill Colwell, was in the Air Force. He was a judge and still is a judge, and we had that sort of law background in common. And he's the most wonderful person. I've never appeared in front of a judge who was as nice as Bill Colwell. I wish I had, but I never did. Managed it. Most of the guys and women I appeared in front of were not quite as nice as he is. So I just thought it was a small token of appreciation for two lives that have been incredibly well lived and have had positive impacts on a lot of other lives.
How lovely. And as you're a gentleman who is writing 2 or 3 books a year, so what is it that's coming out next?
So in April, it's a book called Simply Lies, and it's about 2 women, brand new characters, in this sort of cat and mouse battle back and forth. And the idea for one of the characters came from my wife. She had listened to a podcast that I listened to as well because she thought it was so good, and it was incredible. And the occupation for this woman, she was an online asset locator. So rich people trying to hide their assets, she would go online and break through those walls and find them. And she used to be a detective for real. And she had to take this job because of life changes and a divorce and little kids and all that. But I throw her into this sort of mess where she has to become a detective on the streets again in order to figure this all out. It just felt right. You know, the 2 women are incredible characters, I think. I've always felt comfortable writing about women because I grew up surrounded by really strong female role models my whole life. And I remembered a lot about all of it. So I've always felt very comfortable writing, you know, from a different gender point of view. I've never written about a damsel in distress in my life. One reason, I've never met one. My whole life, never met a damsel in distress. So I hope people enjoy that. And then the book that'll follow that will be a sequel to The 620 Man.
Lovely. And that kind of concludes my questions. And so hold on, David, because there's some coming in from the audience.
Okay.
One of them's picking up particularly, and forgive me, I don't know who's asked them, but so Newcastle Noir person number 1. They were asking about the fact that you went to the library as a child and you were picking up these books. So which one do you remember really influencing you in your early days?
There was a book I read when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old called The Magic Squirrel. It was a Russian parable. And I only singled it out because it was the first book I remember reading where I ached to get back to it. I wanted to get back to that magical world and immerse myself in it. So when I had to put the book down and go to school or do chores or whatever, I never stopped thinking about it. I wanted to, so I sort of look at that book as the one that instilled this lifelong love of reading. There's something about being immersed in a totally magical world that somebody else has thought of, and then being away from it to such an extent that you just ache to be back in it. And that book, The Magic, in fact, I love that novel so much. Years later, I went online and bought a first edition of it, which there aren't many first editions of that book left. And I went back and read it again as a man, and as an adult. And I felt that same sort of attraction and that allure of the story, and reminded me of why I've been a lifelong reader. I can still remember vividly as a little boy having that book, putting it down on my bed and having to go to school and thinking about it, and then running home after school and grabbing it and sitting down and starting to read more pages. It was just this incredible, incredible attraction.
And how vividly you can remember it still today.
It is. Well, books do that. I mean, it's just it's almost like they become a little part of you, a part of your DNA, your intellectual DNA. I tell people a book is never finished. Ones that I write or anyone else writes, a book is never finished until the last reader reads it, because that last reader will put their imprint upon the story. I mean, I could give one book of mine to 100 different people and talk to them later about it, and they'll all have 100 different opinions about what the book means to them. And that's the wonderful thing about books.
We've got one coming from Donna. So with so many bestsellers under your belt, are you confident in each book you produce, or do you fear the next one might not be as good?
Fear. I fear. Fear is a great antidote to complacency. So every time I start a new book, I'm like, I don't know if I can bring the magic again. I have no idea if I know what I'm actually doing. I'm terrified that I'm going to fall flat on my face. I learned from a long time ago, there was a screenwriter, Bill Goldman. He wrote the screenplay for Absolute Power. He also wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Princess Bride, All the President's Men. He won 2 Academy Awards. Great guy. He's passed on now, but so I spent some time with him when he was writing the screenplay for Absolute Power. And he said, I've been doing this for 45 years. And back then I was like, I was in my early 30s and I had no idea what I was doing. And he said, do you know what my greatest fear is? I said, no, Bill, what's your greatest fear? He said, my greatest fear is I'm going to wake up one morning and people are going to realize I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. He said but that is also my superpower. He said, once I lose that, I might as well just hang it up. I'll never be able to write another creative word in my life. And I have never, ever forgotten that.
And it drives you so I suppose I'm interested about the way that you switch between characters as well then. Do you feel like if you were just writing one series about the same character and you wrote it book after book after book, do you fear that you might have some of that complacency? Is that why you switch between them?
I do. I mean, it forces me to freshen things up. It forces me to recreate brand new worlds and brand new characters. I have nothing against people who have written the same character 20, 30, 40 books. I mean, and done so really well. God bless them. That's great. But for me, individually, as a writer, I've always felt like I need that push to get away from old ground and move on to new ground. And that forces me to really get out of my comfort zone. And the other important thing it forces me to do, and as a writer, and whatever walk of life, whatever you do for a living, having the courage to take a risk. You can go through your entire life with never taking a risk. And that sounds safe and comforting, and who wants to be risky? But taking a risk sometimes is the absolute best thing a human being can do, even if you fall on your face, because some of the best lessons in life are learning from mistakes. Anybody who's gone through life saying they've never made a mistake, I would say you really haven't lived life.
And so I suppose this question is possibly going to prompt some of that a little bit then. So is there a character that you've written that is closely, or which character is most closely related to you? Or do you feel like is most closely related to you? And does that resonate in the part that you said about clearly you wanted to take some risks? And all of your characters, I think, take a couple of risks, right?
Yes. Yeah, they all have. And I think that of all the characters I've written, I look at Amos Decker, who is in some ways similar to me, in some ways different from me. Um, I look at Aloysius Archer, a guy who operates in the 40s and 50s before I was even born, but who has an outlook on life that is similar to the one that I sort of have. Knowing that there are good people and bad people in the world, that good people will do bad things, and bad people will do good things sometimes. And I never like to judge anybody, and I don't think any of my characters really do, unless I walked in their shoes. You know, that was a lesson my dad taught me really early on. It sounds cliche-ish, but almost no one practices it. People make assumptions and judgments all the time about people, often without even knowing them. They look over and go, oh, I can tell that person's probably have, you know, X, Y, Z just by looking at them, even though you know nothing about them and haven't even spoken to them. So I'm not sure which character best represents that, but I think in each book, I keep trying to draw characters that get closer and closer to sort of my personal outlook on life. And then I inhabit the rest of the book with characters who don't, you know, and we just see how that happens and what the end result is going to be. Because my books are messy because life is messy.
And I've got one question about the way that you write as well, David. So we talked as well about how your chapters are about 3 to 4, 5 pages long at the most. Is that a personal choice for you? Yes,
it is. I mean, I'd like to have a very driven plot. And I like to have encapsulated scenes in a novel, whether they be action, whether they be conversation, whether they just be a narrative that allows you information about what's going on in the story, to give you small chunks of that so that you can process it, sort of integrate it into your mind and your thread of what the story's about, and then you can move on. There's nothing wrong, and I love books where the chapters are 30, 40, 50 pages long, where the sentences seem to go on for pages and pages with semicolons in between, you know? And that's great because diversity in processes of writing and the way people write is a wonderful thing. What I think works best for me in the genre that I'm in is to give those small chunks, because there's a lot going on in thrillers for the most part, a lot of movie parts, a lot of action, a lot of information. So I found that giving out these smaller chunks so people can have just a little bit of time to process it without having to, you know, read 40 pages works best, and people tend to like it. And the other thing too, it may just be very practical on my point of view, at least lately too, because sometimes I sit down and I'm starting a novel and I'm like, okay, I'm writing for the TikTok generation, so I have 7.5 seconds to capture someone's attention. How do I do it? Do I do it in 3 words, 5 words? Will they allow me 2 sentences to capture their attention before they're off, you know, to the next TikTok episode? So sometimes it's just a very deliberate thing about who's reading now and what their attention spans are. I mean, I've read all the studies that said that general human beings' attention span has shrunken by 45% in the last 10 years, you know, and trust me, I've dealt with people and I can tell you that's exactly right.
And is that your way of telling us there won't be a TikTok dance published on your TikTok account anytime soon?
I just don't see it happening. I mean, you know, maybe it's nice. Maybe if one of my kids jumps in and writes a chapter for me, but I will probably edit it out.
And the last question is about, so you've written a lot of characters and you have seen them through quite a couple of journeys. Can you foresee writing more characters, or do you think you have kind of landed on the ones that you want to see through now?
No, there'll be more characters all the time. Yes, the stable of characters I have now, I love them, and I'll continue to write about some of them, but there's always going to be new characters coming down the road. It's in lieu of, you know, some writers do standalone books every time out. So brand new characters, brand new everything every time out. I sort of have a hybrid where I'll give you 4, 5, 6, 7 books with a set of characters, and you'll have a nice ride, and then that's it. And then I go off and I create another world. And then I'll go off and create another world and give you a slice of that life for a while. It's all about keeping readers fresh and having new opportunities, like with Simply Lies, brand new characters, 2 women, something I've never really done before, where they're the protagonist and antagonist together. And that'll be a nice ride with them. And then, but I'm always on the outlook for what interests me. I write about things that interest me. So I figure if it interests me, it's going to interest other people.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to say as well that we have forum books downstairs who have got many of David's books available. And actually, when David came to the UK, he called in at forum books as well. And I just wanted to mention that David has been quite effusive in saying how much he loves the UK. We're hoping to probably see him back in the next year, but you've really enjoyed the journey in the north of England, didn't you, David?
Oh, I did. We went from west to east and back west. And it was an extraordinary time. We saw the most beautiful towns, villages, and countryside. And I remember we had a driver who was taking us down one road, and he said, "Okay, hang on." And we took a sharp left, and we like roared down this dirt gravel road past all these herds of sheep and other stuff. And we stopped at this fence, and the guy turned around and said, "Welcome to Scotland." And I was like, "That's cool." And he said, "Okay, now we got to go back to Newcastle." So we turned around and off we went. So, but it's just, I've been an Anglophile for a long time, and I grew up reading, Doyle and Agatha Christie and Dickens, and those worlds were really important to me. And I've traveled over there so many times. I've made so many friends from all walks of life, both in publishing and outside of publishing, that I love it. I'm just a confirmed lover, so I can't wait to get back over.
And we can't wait to see you. But for now, thank you so much for joining us online. We are hugely privileged. Wishing you every success with the book launch, Shadows, and everything else that's to come. And actually a really lovely Christmas period to you and your family as well.
Thank you. To yours too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.